The hottest of topics here on Morning Kick Around on Wednesday, March 19th. Last night, the story in American soccer broke. USL owners voted via supermajority to implement promotion and relegation in the USL League system. For more on this, we are welcomed this morning by Simon Evans, U.S. sports correspondent for AFP, a writer of the business newsletter, Soccer Business at soccerbusiness.com. Thank you, Simon. The Soccer Business.
It's new. These things happen. Yeah.
That's okay. We just want to make sure we get it right. That's all I'm saying. Simon, thank you very much for making some time. You and I had a little chat last night. You said you were on this story. You were following up with USL in this vote. Certainly, the word supermajority is interesting. It means it wasn't unanimous, but from what you can tell, how popular is this among the USL owners who really do get the final say?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't unanimous. I mean, supermajority is like what they talk about 2/3, right? Normally for a supermajority. So, I certainly know of one or two clubs that are uneasy about this, one or two who voted against. But I've also spoken to USL owners in the past sort of 12, 14 hours who are really, really enthusiastic about it. I just come off the phone with USL President Paul McDonough, and he's, as you'd expect, extremely bullish about the whole thing. And I wouldn't say he's as enthusiastic as some of the online backers of the pro-rel movement who are really enjoying this moment, quite understandably. But, he's very bullish about the prospects for this.
Well, so this morning you spoke about it. You said he's bullish. Were there any more details that came out in your conversation this morning that weren't in the articles we've seen so far?
Yeah, I'm not sure I haven't read all the articles this morning, but there is a big caveat to this. And I think this is a little bit of a thing where people can maybe put the brakes on a little bit and consider, a little bit of a reality check. The caveat is this is entirely contingent on the USL launching a new Division 1 league, right? That wasn't, to me, 100% clear from the things that emerged yesterday, but it is. They're not going to do this in the current structure of USL. The words that were used to me was that wouldn't be authentic, and it wouldn't work to have promotion and relegation between a D2 league, which is the USL Championship, and the D3. So it needs this new D1. Now, as everyone discussed after that announcement last month about a new D1, there's a lot involved in meeting those sanctioning requirements as they stand. So for this promotion and relegation to come into effect, you need to have a 12-team Division 1 league that meets the requirement of 15,000 capacity stadiums, all the market requirements and everything else. Talks haven't begun yet with US Soccer about that sanctioning requirement and things like waivers and so on. There's a whole host of other complications with this, but to me, that caveat is really, really important that people take that on board.
Yeah, that certainly the devil is in the details there, and I think we could easily dive into what kind of format would this be? Would this be promotion playoffs? Would it simply be the top 2 or 3 teams, and that to be determined as well, Simon? One of the elements here that is interesting to me is because of PLS, and I imagine there will be negotiations and discussions with the U.S. Soccer around PLS, you don't want, if you're USL, you don't want to have a situation where a team gets promoted but can't meet the standard for the next league, the league up,
right,
and has to stay where they are. Or you certainly don't want clubs to be potentially folding because suddenly things change dramatically. Did Paul address those concerns?
On the first one, I asked him about, what about a situation where you have the 12 teams that all meet the requirement, and then after the first season, a team in a 7,000 capacity high school football stadium get promoted to the new Super Division 1 league. And he said, well, we'd have to look at a waivers system with US Soccer on that. The details to be worked out. And almost inevitably in this argument, the case of Bournemouth came up, in the Premier League with a very small stadium. And he's like, look, if a club's well organized and they've got a small stadium and they've got plans to expand it, then, maybe there can be some flexibility there. But you're right. I mean, the other question I put to him was about, if you're asking people now to invest in a Division 1 league, because there's only going to, if it is a 12-team league, there's probably only going to be half of that USL Championship teams that get upgraded. They're looking for new clubs to come into that league, new investors with new stadiums and everything. And I mean, there's so much going on at the moment that in some ways that doesn't sound as far-fetched as it may have done once upon a time, because there's a lot going on. But if you do that and you're saying to them, please create a new team, build a 15,000 stadium, and by the way, after 1 year, you might be in Division 2. That's the classic argument, of course. That's the MLS argument. But
Right. Let me ask you, because I mean, obviously that just opens the question of expansion, and we don't imagine USL is going to close the door on expansion anytime soon. They'd have to populate a first division, and who knows who's left around in the USL Championship and USL League One, but they're not going to say, hey, we're not adding teams because suddenly we have Pro Rel. But if you have promotion and relegation, Simon, and a team comes in their first season, are they immune from relegation? Depending on what league they start in, do you treat this as almost an open system, even though it's not, and everybody has to start League One, no matter what size their market, no matter what size their stadium, no matter what their ambition?
I mean, that's the way it works in the rest of the world, right?
It is.
Which is always the argument about Pro Rel. There's so many details to be worked out. You know what? I mean, I really came away from this thinking that I have absolutely no doubt that Paul McDonough is very driven about this, believes it can happen, and believes really his job is to push USL forward as much as he can. But I do feel this is, like the Division 1 idea, perhaps more towards a statement of intent than a concrete plan at this stage, I would say.
Kind of drawing would you call this this announcement and the Division 1 announcement almost like a line in the sand? We're not going to sit idly by. We are going to attempt to shake up the current American soccer structure, and basically giving them a 3 to 5 year runway to implement both, and just kind of saying what they're going to do and then figure out the details in the time between now and then.
Yeah, there's not a lot of time, though, is there? 2028 is what they're saying for launching the Division 1 league. It was 2027 last month, I think, but it's now 2028, and the same for Pro Rel coming in. That's 3 years to do an awful lot, but we are in this moment of intense activity. I mean, producing the Soccer Business newsletter and speaking to people in the market a lot over the last couple of months, there is so much going on. I can't stress this enough. And even yesterday, before this came out, USL was announcing, talks in Pensacola about a new team there, working with the city. There's stuff going on in Buffalo and so many places. So while it does sound really, really ambitious, there's also a lot of ambitious plans out there involving cities and involving investors. So some of this might happen, all of it might happen, or none of it might happen. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't be much clearer than that.
No, I think that's a fair assessment of where we are.
I think that's where we live. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the state of American soccer. I think a cynical view of this, and certainly I was open to a cynical view of the original First Division announcement. Was this positioning the league for a sale? Were there other things happening behind the scenes that we were not privy to? That this wasn't necessarily just about, hey, we are ambitious and we see opportunity. But in terms of promotion and relegation, you certainly, if you're a fan of the league or you want to see promotion and relegation work in the United States, such as this form is, you want this to be because they see this as the natural state, the way that football is supposed to work, as opposed to a cynical view, which is they're doing this for the cheap heat. They're doing this just to get attention, Simon. Now, you pointed out there's lots of expansion discussion, lots of investment coming in to their leagues. They might not need it. They might not need that cheap heat.
I don't think they do. No, I really think, and people, when I talk to people in the soccer business outside the US, I mean, primarily in Britain and so on, they know what USL is now. I mean, that was a conversation that if I was having 5 years ago with people, I was having to explain what USL was, and it's not like that anymore. So that they have got that, and there is that interest. And look, even it's not just the growth is coming from the fact that, it cost $500 million to start an expansion franchise in San Diego. And not everyone has $500 million when they want to start a soccer team in a city. That's what's driving a lot of interest in USL. And that's no different for foreign investors, by the way. And I asked Paul about that, and he said, yes, there has been foreign interest in the Division 1 club idea. And he thinks that promotion and relegation will not scare them off at all, but actually attract them, because it makes it feel more part of the global game.
That's an interesting topic because on this show we've talked about American owners going abroad for an easier entry point to club ownership. Stepping outside MLS's large expansion fees, and so it's interesting that USL's new approach here is making it appealing for those on the other side looking in.
It is.
Can you give any specifics? Whether there's floats talks of investors in teams that exist or for expansion?
Well, I mean, there's one case already, Bay FC with Peter Moore, who was a Liverpool executive at Liverpool, high executive at Liverpool, who is now not Bay FC, that's the NWSL, but the USL team up there.
Monterey. I think you're talking about Monterey.
Yes, yes. And Peter Moore is involved there. There are other people who are looking at it and talking about it. We see there's a Swedish investor in Sarasota Paradise. He's the owner actually of that club. I know he lives over here, but it's a foreign owner of a club. So stuff is going on there. I mean, 500 million is a huge amount of money. I mean, we're looking at Indianapolis as a potential MLS expansion market. Are they ready to spend $500 million as part of that process? And does MLS want to drop down from that? That doesn't really seem like an MLS thing to want to do. Kind of trapped in that situation a little bit, and USL has that flexibility.
Well, it's fascinating this is happening. I mean, again, let's just be clear. This is, again, a closed league implementing promotion or relegation, different levels that they operate, right? This is not an open system. It does, I do imagine that if we're ever going to get to maybe not a truly open system, but MLS being involved in promotion and relegation, then this has to work, right? This has to be a massive success for the USL to send a message to MLS that you're leaving money on the table or you should be engaged with this, because there's no incentive. If we can bring it to MLS for a second, Simon, there's no incentive for Major League Soccer to consider anything like this.
No. I mean, I asked Don Garber last month what he thought about the USL Division 1 idea. And he said, hey, we've been doing this for 30 years and the fans will decide what they like. He didn't really go there. But I don't think MLS is particularly concerned about this. It doesn't affect their plans, I don't think, in any way. I'd be surprised. People love to look at moves and decisions and say, oh, they're trying to do this because of USL. And I don't think MLS is looking at it like that. And USL haven't had any discussions with MLS about this, about involving them in the process. I asked that directly. I mean, you do have to ask some dumb questions sometime in journalism, but just for clarification, you haven't talked about this with MLS. No, they haven't, of course. So it is interesting because, MLS is becoming a very expensive place to get into, and USL isn't.
Yeah, look, I don't want to get into the ideologies here, and again, there are segments of the American soccer fan base who are very pitchforks and torches over the idea of promotion and relegation, and good for them. That's fine. I have no issue with them advocating, and people who just want MLS to continue to grow, I'm fine with that too. This probably doesn't happen if MLS doesn't do what it's done in over 30 years and laid some groundwork. As imperfect as MLS is, we're not here if not for what MLS has done. But this does strike me, Simon, and by the way, Peter Moore, it was Santa Barbara. I got it wrong. It's Santa Barbara out in California. Sky, Santa Barbara Sky, I think is what they're called. This is interesting in the era of the Super League discussions and whatever it is that Unify League or whatever they're talking about over there. Who knows if that ever gets off the ground? But you kind of have MLS moving in that direction. I mean, it's a domestic league ostensibly, but of course it's closed. Entry costs $500 million, and then you have what USL will sell as a more grassroots version of the game, even if again it is wholly owned by USL. Can you give us some thoughts on that as you have watched both these things happen? And again, we're going to see if Europe continues to move in a direction that closes off its biggest clubs from things like promotion and relegation and things like having to qualify for the top leagues?
Yeah, I mean, you should probably get Todd Bowley on to discuss that because he's always coming up with these ideas, blue sky thinking, as they call it in his world, about possible structures and making it a little bit more like North American sport in some ways. Yeah, I mean, there is a contradiction there. And the interesting thing about this country is I don't really see a reason why those two things can't coexist. I mean, it's a massive country. Is is it impossible for both USL and MLS to succeed in their plans? The MLS exists as like a closed league, but maybe a bigger, maybe gets to 36 teams, and maybe they go to divisions like the NFL. Whatever happens with MLS, with a lot of money in it and big stars and so on, and then a structure that, you know, allows you to create a team in Boone, North Carolina, and come up the rankings and get yourself to the top division. You compete with MLS teams in the US Open Cup, and you know, why couldn't that exist? There's a lot of markets, and soccer is a game that has a chance to be a professional presence in every community. That's not the case with other sports. That's the massive advantage soccer has got. You are never going to have pro basketball or pro NFL in Boone, North Carolina, but you could have a pro soccer team.
We are on the edge of the undiscovered country here in American soccer. Simon Evans, U.S. sports correspondent for AFP. Thank you for joining us here this morning. Let the listeners and the viewers know where to find your work.
Yeah, you can find my AFP work on Yahoo Sports and all kinds of places all over the internet. And you can find my soccer business newsletter at www.soccerbusiness.com. TheSoccerBusiness.com.
TheSoccerBusiness.com.
Even I got it wrong.
I've started a hope. Yeah, thankfully that's not just my issue. TheSoccerBusiness.com. Simon Evans, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Kick Around for such an exciting topic. Viewers, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are edging near our 1,500 subscriber goal, working our way towards 5,000.
We're going to be on this story a lot. We're going to be talking about this stuff a lot. I love this stuff. This is what gets my blood flowing when we talk American soccer. I'll talk about games, and I'll talk about goals, and I'll talk about championships and all those things. But man, I love this stuff. The growth of the game happening in real time, and we're going to be chronicling it here on Morning Kick Around with people like Simon Evans. We're working on guests. I'm working on somebody Friday, potentially from the USL itself. So stay tuned. Please subscribe so you know when all that stuff is happening.
Yeah, we're also on social media at MKickaround on the X, Instagram, and Blue Sky platforms. Already some of the binary, this is a terrible idea for Pro Rel, or this is the thing that's going to save American soccer, already happening on the articles and on our social media posts. And then ko-fi.com/morningkickaround if you'd like to kick in some financial support. Thank you to all those who have done that already and those who will continue to do so. Let's continue this breaking news of the